Good morning, students. Welcome back to your history lecture. In the last few video lectures, we have studied about the caste framework in ancient India, and we studied about deviations from the caste rules as witnessed in the ruling dynasties of Indian subcontinent. Now we'll study about a different kind of social category known as Jatis. So let us begin with a new topic, Jatis and social mobility. To understand the social category of Jati, we need to look into another social category which we just studied about in the last class, that is the caste system, how it evolved and how it finally started degenerating. And it is this degeneration that led to the evolution of Jati or subcaste. So to understand this, we need to go back to the Vedic age. So if you remember clearly, the caste system originated during the Vedic age. So the people of Vedic age had a very rural lifestyle, okay? They lived in villages and they were more preoccupied with fulfilling the duties that was prescribed for them, so that there is no social upheaval and it is easier for them to attain moksha. वो कहते हैं ना, अगर अपना कास्ट को अच्छे से फॉलो करते तो मोक्ष मिलने का साधन होता. Now as time passed, okay, with the coming of second phase of civilization, as we have seen, people started questioning these thought processes. And with so much of social and economic interaction happening from the age of Mahajanpad era, it became clear that what was initially ideal in the form of caste system was not very practically applicable in the Mahajanpad era or during the second phase of urbanization. It was seen that people started deviating from the ideal occupation written in the Vedas and followed up till then. It was thus seen that because of this interaction and a new phase of urbanization taking place, there were many more groups emerging which had livelihood which was unheard of before. ठीक है, तो उसको इस फोर फोल्ड कास्ट कैटेगरी में allocate करना बहुत ही difficult हो गया. So what did Brahmins try to do? Instead of relinquishing their hold, अपना power देने के बजाय, they started to assimilate these new occupational groups into subcaste. क्योंकि caste तो already it was divine in nature and it was only 4 in categories. So बाकी को कहाँ incorporate करेंगे? You cannot make more castes. How can you change a divine order? So what they did, they started assigning these groups a term called Jati. Okay, they made them as Jati. So Jati as caste was based on birth, but there are certain differences between them. Okay, please make sure you write it down in your book or somewhere or keep it in your mind. First thing, the Varna system was very ideal system, and with passage of time it became a little difficult to practice, whereas Jati was much more realistic and functional. Next point, the Varna system was only fourfold classification. It had a universal validity in the sense everywhere all throughout the Indian subcontinent, wherever it was practiced in this fourfold categories, whereas Jati as occupational group had a very regional influence. It was very regional in outlook. Pan India या pan subcontinent outlook नहीं था उसका. So what did Brahmins do? They ended up solving the problem of whenever they encountered a new group, they assigned them with a new Jati. Examples of it is given in your book. For example, if Brahmins encountered people living in forests, they were termed as nishads. A story of nishad we have already done before, that is in Mahabharat, Guru Dronacharya and Eklavya story. Then, if there was a category of people who practiced occupation such as goldsmith, they were termed as Suvarnakara. Now, see, why is that so? Think about it. Normally, these people would fall under the category of normal artisans, but then again, gold is considered to be of so much more value. ठीक है, तो उसको normal artisan या blacksmith से equate नहीं कर सकते हैं. That is why they had to create an altogether new jati for them. And finally, these jatis, they came in together, they binded themselves together and organized themselves into what we have already studied, known as shrenis or guilds. And what did these guilds do? The guilds were basically involved in the making, processing and selling of an article which that entire guild produced. Now let us look into one such guild, that of silk weavers, and how it provides an excellent example for witnessing whether or not there was social mobility within the jati system. Okay, what is social mobility? First of all, let us look into the term mobility. Mobility means movement to and fro or up and down. So what will social mobility imply? It will mean movement from one social group to another, that is movement from one jati to another. So we'll just look through this example whether there was social mobility allowed or seen in jati system. So it is through a stone inscription found in Mandsaur, Madhya Pradesh, which gives the history of a guild of silk weavers who migrated from Gujarat to Mandsaur because they had much more better opportunities to be availed there. Okay, they had heard about a local ruler here meaning, see, this is the Gupta age, so we'll be talking about local ruler. Jahan mention hoga, we'll think of the Samants. Remember, we have spoken about Samants in the last chapter. So who were Samants? The Samants and the Gupta rulers, they had a feudal relationship. So always try to connect and study. Okay, now before this we had studied about how guilds were involved in donating huge sums of money as a form of religious donations known as votive inscription. Now for the first time, it is through the stone inscription found in Mandsaur we get a glimpse into the lifestyle and the nature of guilds or shrenis. So what are some of these observations? The first one being that the membership of a particular guild was based on the same craft specialization. Okay, because they were members of same craft, that's why they came together and formed a guild or shrenis. But there's something else that needs to be looked into. Just because they shared a common profession, that doesn't mean that they didn't have another interest that they would further pursue or make them their occupation later in life. So if you go through source 8 of your NCERT, you will come across the number of varied interests these silk weavers had and how they were excellent at it too. So ideally speaking, some of these interests are not in line with their profession. It is completely detached from it, but still they pursued it and became excellent at it. So in spite of their common profession but varied interests, they ended up collectively deciding to invest their wealth in the construction of a temple to honor the sun god. So this is where you witness that they were not bound by their jati. They were not bound to follow the occupational group that they are born in. They were not supposed to follow the same occupation. If they were skillful enough, or if they had attained that level of mastery, they could switch to another profession, and maybe in coming generations that would lead to creation of another jati. Now in your book there is another topic given, the case of merchants. This is not for the purpose of exam, but if you read it you will come to know the assimilation of one or a different jati together, or two different jati together. Okay, example is given here, kindly go through it. Let us now move into the next topic, beyond the four varnas, integration. Okay, so whenever we are talking about Brahmanical tradition as the dominant tradition, we do keep in mind, or we have to keep in mind, that there will be certainly certain population or groups which will be outside the reach of these ideas. Given the size of India, okay, the subcontinental size, given the fact that there might have been a lot of problems in transport and communication, there might have been lack of communication during that time. So how did Brahmins view these people who fell outside the purview of Brahmanical norms, and these groups or people who practice their own local customs and tradition, which might have been varied, much varied from the Brahmanical point of view? So within the Sanskrit text, these groups are mentioned as odd, uncivilized, or even animal-like. So this notion that whenever a dominant tradition encounters a local or regional tradition which is very varied from the dominant tradition is not something very specific to Brahmins. If you remember your 11th standard history textbook clearly, we spoke about, when we were doing the chapter regarding Native Indian Americans, we spoke about how the Europeans who had migrated to America, what kind of treatment they meted out to the Native American tribes. If you remember clearly, we said that how they viewed the Native Americans as odd, uncivilized. Do you remember that? Okay, so the same logic applies here. That means this entire idea that whenever there is a dominant tradition encountering a regional or a local group with different practices, the kind of behavior that follows is something very universal. I suppose it is very human. That means it is etched in human behavior. ये कुछ ऐसा odd चीज नहीं है. This is what dominant traditions do. In fact, it is to the extent that there are several jokes that suppose an alien, okay, the UFO wala aliens, if they land on Earth and they being far superior, obviously they've traveled from somewhere else, so we expect them to be superior. So if they are superior and if they encounter human race, they will treat us as, or they might end up viewing us as uncivilized or animal-like when compared to them. Okay, so coming back to your text material. So who are some of these groups that are mentioned in the Sanskrit texts? The first one is the people or the groups dwelling in forests, the forest dwellers. So they were mentioned as Nishad. So they are one such group. The second group, which the Brahmanical tradition viewed with suspicion, were the nomadic pastoralists. Okay, why? Because obviously they're moving from one place to another and the normal laws of the land are not applicable to them because they are always on move. So how will you keep a check or control over them? So the nomadic pastoralists were the second group of people which the Brahmanical did not the Brahminical tradition did not view with a lot of fondness. Okay. The third group of people are those people who spoke non-Sanskritic language, meaning the languages that you can say were not derived within the Indian subcontinent. So who will these people be? Obviously the outsiders. And the most prominent example of these are people who were termed as barbaric or outsiders, called Malach. And we already know that the Shakas were called so. Shakas ruling the northwestern part of Indian subcontinent. So, in spite of some suspicion existing between the Brahmanical tradition or Brahmanical society and these groups which practice their own local customs and beliefs, whenever they encountered each other, जब भी एक दूसरे से मिले, that doesn't mean that they were always up against arms. हमेशा लड़ाई ही नहीं करते थे. There was interaction between them. There was sharing of ideas and beliefs in these people, and this is mentioned in Mahabharata. So if you look at source 9 of your NCRT, you'll get a clearer picture of how the Pandavas, who are supposed to uphold the Brahmanical tradition, meet a social group which was termed as Rakshasa. So please read the story. So what is the takeaway? What should be the takeaway from the story is that the historians who have read this Mahabharat, they claim that the term Rakshas is used to describe people whose practices differed from what was laid down in Brahmanical text. ये बात याद रखना बहुत ज़रूरी है. So always keep in this mind when you are reading Mahabharata in the form of stories. Sometimes these people, whether it is Rakshas or Asura or whatever, so they will be portrayed in a way that have very exaggerated features, might be their nose or ears or facial features, but that was merely to show that they are different from ideal. ठीक है, इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि they are encountering a different species altogether. Fine, this is it for today. Kindly go through this entire topic and make sure you do your assignment on time.